5 archetypes, and I'm interested in, when we have a website, we only have one landing page. So how do you support all 5 archetypes and help them get through the best way they can with you only have one splash page or one landing page? Or is there a standard or suggested layout or format for a population that contains all 5?
Yeah, that's a great question. First, you probably don't have to support all 5 on any given page. More than likely, somebody's not going to use your site. But even if everyone in the country or everyone in the state does, there's groupings of interactions or things you can do to attract archetypes. So you just have different design interactions and different ways to chunk information. So for example, your decisives and thorough are going to want a search bar that's prevalent on that landing page. They're going to want, at least your thorough is going to want the ability to drive down into additional information. Your decisives are going to want summary information. But you can have summary information along with step 1 of 5, for example, which is really good for your opportunist, and your decisive will use it as well, right? Quick links, your opportunist will use that, your decisive will use it. So it's different types of interaction that may even do the same thing. They may go to the same place, right? But the way that they look and the way that they're presented on the page will attract one person over the other. And this is very important and a little bit difficult to do. But understand that if I click into quick links, I'm probably not a thorough, right? I'm looking for information. So the people who are clicking into quick links are looking for quick information. So now you want summary or chunked information. Now you want step type of information. So knowing that you have a certain type of behavioral type that's clicking into that area, everything after that should support that behavioral type. Does that make sense? But you still want to have them have the ability to get back to where they were in case they accidentally clicked there and now they're thorough and this isn't what I wanted, so I have to get back to where I was so I can get to the real information. So it's different design elements that attracted different people, and they will self-select into those areas. Does that make sense?
Have you seen any differences when users have to use your product? Like people have to pay their taxes, they have to register their vehicle. When you're trying to get them to do something that's optional, I imagine that's a little different look. So I was just wondering if you'd seen any patterns when something's required.
Frustration, yeah. Even when it's required, I think if you can accommodate as much as possible the different behavioral types, you'll make it more pleasing to them. You'll less likely get calls to a call center type of thing, so you might reduce cost in another area of the organization by improving, something that they have to do anyway. Teaching your citizens to do things and moving, I think you mentioned moving the needle toward where you want them to go is not a bad thing, right? So we did this with Verizon, and the traditional archetype wouldn't use online tools. They would always go into the store, so they were a very expensive customer, right? They just walk in, hand the phone over, and go, "It's broke." Why is it broke? I don't know. It doesn't work. Fix it. So what we did was we helped them come up with a training program for those people. I mean, you'd see them. I mean, they walk in, it's broke. I don't know how to fix it, right? And fix it. Great. While we're fixing it, come over here. We want to show you this kiosk. We're going to show you where you can look up your bill online, and we're going to show you how to pay your bill online, right? I don't want to pay my bill online. Just come over. You got nothing else to do anyway, right? So starting to make them do easier tasks to get them into bigger tasks and kind of training them along the way is not a bad thing.
As far as chunking information, your examples that you used were related links and related files. And I know that we're very text heavy, and also keeping what you were saying in mind with the quick links. What's some suggestions of how we can do that? Like using the columns still and maybe anchors or questions up top, or, you have any suggestions for it. And also, is the site pages with all that heavy text going to be a problem with the migration?
I'll take this one where it's the migration and chunking specific. There's going to be places where it depends on the page. I would say when we kind of go back to that good content, if it's a site page and it's an informational page and we can see that, it's been edited recently and, it's one of your top pages, those are definitely going to be the candidates for, migrating over, even, automating that. So whether or not it's a problem is going to be hard for me to speak to now, but I'll say that, I'm not saying that site pages are bad, right? It's just like when we have all that mixed content, it gets hard to sort of control. I know that some of what User Insights found on some of our larger pages was that when a large page can be useful for the people that need all that information as long as it is grouped by, headings and sort of called out. And so again, that's where chunking can be helpful because you can sort of call out different sections and link between them. But it depends on the page. If there's like a specific one, we can always talk about a specific page.
I'm going to piggyback off of your question in terms of using columns. What about an index list also to organize chunks?
Yes.
I use that not just, there's different ways you can do the index list. I kind of hack the Q&A one and use it to organize by chunks of information. Is that?
Yes. No, that's a good one too. Index lists are really good for FAQ lists or other ways because it's very structured. So that's absolutely a good
so that candidate. Is a good example of good content.
Yes.
Okay.
Index list good. Yay, Emma.
I think you made Kendra happy. That's great. All right, do we have another question?
So does GTA has a framework to incorporate all the standardization that you're talking about? Like as an agency that I can adapt to it?
I can start. So we have this Drupal 7 platform. It's a multi-site platform, but it's all single code base. And depending on what your agency requirements are, at this point we are able to accommodate from a large scale site like Department of Revenue to a pretty small lightweight site like maybe Lake Linear with like very few pages. In a future state, though, what we're looking at is for some of the sites that probably would not be a good candidate for the platform, who would have like their unique needs, we want to make sure that we are able to offer them a hosting space. But if that does fit within our platform needs and what you all are looking for, going back to the 80-20 rule, 80% of the stuff that we mostly do align with each other as far as organizations are concerned, and there's like a 20% of what makes every agency unique for what their charter is as far as online delivery. I can see where some agencies are not, a candidate for the platform, in which case we want to make sure like we give them guidance through our digital standards, or even a possible future hosting space where the code aligns with what we have on the platform. So if an agency that's not on the platform ends up developing something, that also can be contributed back to the platform. But for now, the current state is that we do have this platform. We have about 80 websites on it. About under 60 agencies are hosted on this platform. And the consistency that earlier we were talking about is what's the driving factor for the platform, is when someone goes to DOR's website, when someone goes to Human Services website, there is a certain level of consistency. When I mean consistency, those two sites don't look anything like each other, but at the same time, from a usage perspective, there are certain patterns that make a user understand that this is all one organization.
So you have guidelines for a website, how to look like. So one way is to as an agency, I can do it, or you could host it for us. So if I come to you, that means, am I giving up my role as web content manager, and am I losing my job? That's what I'm coming to.
No, that's a great question, and I guess you could.
I don't want to lose my job.
That's reasonable.
No, that's fair. Majority of the people sitting around you actually are web content managers, and what we have been able to provide them is not having to worry about making sure your site is up, running, or development. You can truly focus on content. And when Kendra was talking about all the things we have on the platform and all the future things we are developing for the platform, we want to work on that together. So I can see your job being more strategic than just having more manual, kind of way of adding content, deleting content. If you're aware of the webmaster title back in the day that agencies used to have, we don't need webmasters anymore. Right? That's what the platform does for us. So we can truly focus on our strategy. We can focus on all the things that we're talking about. Is your content really doing well? Like, what are your success factors? So your role truly, kind of changes. But I want to say, yeah, there's absolutely no way anyone would lose their job because the platform wouldn't publish anything by itself.
And if I'll grab onto that too. Because we bring this up a lot, right, where there's so much to do that there's never going to be sort of a, hey, since we're doing this, like, there's so many other things you can be doing. Our team, before we moved to Drupal 7, we were on a much harder to manage content management system, and our full-time job was just keeping things from breaking and making sure that things publish for people. And so there was a bit of, a fear of, well, shoot, once we get to a platform that actually works, are they just going to lay us all off because they don't need us anymore? No, that meant that we could start focusing on strategy, right? We could start focusing on making things better instead of just keeping the lights on. And I would say that's a lot more fun.
Great.
GOVTalks did not happen back then. Now
no one had time for
that. We can focus on this.
Do we have another question? Okay, Billy.
Thanks again for having us. This has been great, and there's a huge focus on content, and I know part of the future of the platform is around service delivery, and I apologize if this has been asked, but I'm still trying to wrap my head around kind of beyond content when it comes to more transactional service-oriented features. So there was an example of a couple times of business registration, right? So let's say the customer journey to find out how to register a business in Georgia is really intuitive, whether through the portal or Google or what have you. But then the next step is registering the business, which is, I'm guessing, a whole other application, probably not going through many of these UX processes. And when you look at some of the other services, they kind of fall out, at least in North Carolina, often fall outside of our Drupal platform. Beyond content, can you speak a little bit to opportunities for more application-like transactional things, or is that just, it may not be the right fit for Drupal or for George's use of the platform? Thank you.
You can start with that. No, that's a great question. What's the difference between what we have been doing so far on the web platform, and how does that extend to transactional services? Content's key, obviously, like you said, everything's driven from a content perspective, but truly, like, what we're trying to focus on is that user journey. And if that user journey ends with an application, there is like no reason why we cannot work with our agencies to do the same thing that we would be doing with the website. From a technology perspective, you're right, most applications might not be a good fit for Drupal, and we are aware of that. But again, for a constituent view, they don't even know they're interacting with Drupal. They might be moving from Drupal to something else, depending on the application. Our job is to make sure that transition is as smooth as possible. And then, I'm sure North Carolina is pretty similar to what we have. Our application layer pretty much, is owned by all the agencies. So each agency has, their entire application keys to how they want to drive that. But that's great because they can manage all the infrastructure and all the things that they, want to have the application successful for. But the experience layer, at this point, no one was claiming that. And this is where I guess this team can come together, because everyone here working on their website, at this point also understands how the users interact and how they go about doing their business with your organization. So when that goes to applications, we can work with the application teams and make sure that experience is what stays consistent.
If I can add on to that, one of the things that we talked about a lot was that cohesive branding, right? And how currently when a citizen goes from your website to your service, it's a totally different experience, and they, wait, am I in the right place? Yeah. So one thing that we want to do is build a design framework that can be used not only on our platform, but on new applications or even retrofitted onto old applications, so that you're starting to match that common look and feel. And that way we can also hit a lot of those patterns and requirements within the design framework for accessibility or responsive design, and even some usability patterns just within sort of those pieces of the design that you can pull in for an application or a service. So those are some big, I'm glad you asked the question because it didn't make it to any of the slides, right? When we're talking long term, those are some of the things we really want to be able to do, is help provide that consistency beyond just what the website is. I was talking to someone earlier who said, the complaints we get aren't about our website, they're about all the old applications that are hard to use, right? And that's where everyone's coming to Georgia to do, right, is meet those. So that is something we'd like to not build everyone's applications for them. We don't have resources for that, right? But help sort of provide those guidelines so that we have that experience layer there.
Right. And earlier when you talked about the Center of Excellence group, that's exactly what we want to come together to discuss. What is that design system that we should be creating for? There are a lot of things that we know now for how citizens trust us. So based on those findings, we want to make sure we build that and have that framework in place. So again, Center of Excellence, any interest, let us know.
So I want to take a question that was submitted, and it's actually my favorite question. It is, what are some effective metrics to track success in user experience?
Conversion. We actually do a ton of work in the transactional part of sites, and so conversion is probably it for us. It's probably our biggest one because we're primarily a commercial type of organization. Time on task is another one. Be careful with time on task because, as you know, you have different behavioral types, and some they actually want to take more time on a task. Others don't. Opportunist, right? Completion rate. Completion rate doesn't mean that it's a conversion rate. It's just that they've completed a user journey of some sort. So that's a big one. Bounce rate. We saw bounce rate earlier, and it can be tricky with how you measure bounce rate. And it could also be driven by search engines like Google, organic versus paid search, but bounce rate certainly hits up there. Reduced support costs. I think that's a huge one, right? So if we can get people to support themselves through our sites, and they're not calling call centers, and if you can somehow tie those together, which is really difficult to do, but if you could ever tie those metrics together, which we did with Verizon, we showed a 330% increase in online support, use of support tools over a 3-month period. We didn't do this part, but after that, they did a business case on what that meant in reduction in call volume, which translated into tens of millions of dollars for them. That's a big one.
And if I can add to that, I think this is where probably government might be a little different, where our success factors, going back to Kendra's talk, really is what are our goals, right? And a lot of times, engagement and metrics are just looked at from a numbers perspective. I think this is truly where the user journey is handy. Every agency really should be aware of what are those top things that citizens use within their organization, and how do they go about doing that. And once you identify those channels, once you identify those touch points across those channels, that's when you will know if my call volume is going up or if there is any event that is triggering a certain behavior from the users. And if that aligns with our goals, there are so many goals, each of you all have goals from a business perspective, but also understanding those user goals and aligning both of them and then putting those metrics, then it starts making sense. If you just Google up UX, you will definitely get the UX view of a marketer. But this is where we are different. We are not marketing anything, right? And to someone's question earlier, what is the sentiment when someone has to use your service and are forced to use your service? I think that sentiment really needs to be confidence. At the end of a transaction, if a user feels at least confident that, you know, they were able to achieve what they were looking for without any friction, I think that's good. Because we are definitely not in the business of gratifying someone or, you know, just amusing someone or entertaining someone, right? So we're not Netflix, we are not Pinterest. So we should be aware of that. But as long as we provide them that consistent, frictionless experience, I think any metrics that, you know, pretty much point to that would be something that would be a success factor.
I do want to reiterate the point about the call centers for those agencies that do have call centers, because I know that back to those silos, right? It's really easy to like not think about how what we're doing on the web might impact a whole other team that does this, you know, other task. And so if you can start having those conversations and find out what people are calling about, Department of Revenue's had some success in specifically going to that, saying our goal is to reduce call volume. What are the big questions? How can we address that? And they've definitely seen some success and cost savings there. So, but it starts out with, you know, reaching across and talking to someone from these other silos.
When you have a site that has lots of information that's really needed for a particular audience, like asthma sufferers or families, we have people who are teachers, public health workers, all, you know, parents, all needing different types of information. And a good part of this group is in South Georgia, where we all recognize the limitations in lots of different areas. How do we get that how do we make our page, our site, our information chunkable and usable and helpful to folks who don't necessarily have those kinds of resources, whether it's because they don't have internet or they don't know what we're called or whatever?
That's a really good question. The weirdest start, I would say, is do you have, what agency are you with? Public Health. So you're on the platform. So you've got Google Analytics that'll tell you what search terms people are using to get to your site, and then also what search terms they're using once they're inside your site. And so that one to me has always been really interesting, because I've found on some websites that Google has gotten them to the page that has the answer they want, but there's so much text on that page that they don't even realize it has the answer. So they type in the same search term on that page. And that's telling us right there, right? Like, it's too complicated, we don't have the right terminology. But so that can help you with what words people are typing to look for something, and you can find where to sort of fit those phrases in. And then for chunking sort of just like that information, headings and bullet points and sort of, you know, simple sentences actually help a lot. They help for, you know, people that are just multitasking and skimming, and also, you know, people that just are at a lower reading level.
Yeah. If I could just add on that, I would say find that 20% of your content that is being accessed to feed the 80% intents. And Google Analytics is a really good way of doing it for web. If you all have call centers, you know, that's also another way of communicating and talking to people who actually call in. You know, maybe talking to the people who are answering those calls to find out like why they choose to call instead of going to the website. And then a lot of that intent on the call will also inform you for like why people are choosing to call, what are they looking for that they're not finding on the website. So it might also, you know, kind of give you a good idea of the gaps in there. So across channels, wherever you find the, you know, opportunity to, you know, get more insight on what is it that people are looking for, will really inform you on your content strategy.
Yeah, so just one more thing there. We did a bunch of work, we've done a bunch of work for CDC and in some of these different areas, and one of the most visited pages on there is Yellow Book for them. It used to be called Yellow Book. I'm not sure what it's called now, but it had the same kind of thing. It had content for health practitioners doctors and nurses, and it had content for consumers, mostly parents, and they separated it, and mostly because of the reading level requirement to meet for consumers. We toyed with putting it together, and it didn't work. And so then we toyed again with separating it out, but giving access to either one. So before, the health practitioners, you had to have a login to get to that content, which created this angst for the consumer. They were like, whoa, what are they telling them that they're not telling us, right? So we said, why don't we just make this transparent? I mean, who cares if they go look at the content? If they don't understand it, they're going to come back to their content, right? And so having a place that says for parents, for teachers, for practitioners, it's not a bad thing. As long as you give transparency to the other audiences, I think it's fine.
My name is Skeene. I'm with DCS, Department of Community Supervision. My question is, how does one improve the user experience when not a lot of transactional services are offered on the website? So for instance, our website reads kind of like a book and information about what our agency provides, and that's it.
I can start off, and I'm sure we all have various answers to this question, because it's a really good question. When you don't have a transaction, when there is no ka-ching sound, how do you really measure the interaction? And this is where you probably want to break those interactions into smaller chunks, and going back to what is it that your users need from your site. If those pages are identified and a clear path to those pages is offered, I think you're getting close to what you're trying to achieve. That's kind of what we did with Georgia Gov when we redesigned that. We knew we had like all kinds of content. It was nothing was transactional, and it actually was a mirror from all the sites that we were hosting and linking off to all the sites. So like for us, like a high bounce rate at back then, we were thinking like, well, maybe it's good because people are just finding what they want to do and bounce off to that site or whatever. Later we realized like that's a completely wrong way of looking at it. And once we started going after like what the intent is, that's when we truly figured out what our goals are to be able to serve that. And then we started putting like some KPIs around that.
So now that we've heard all of this, information, what are some resources or some next steps that people can take that where if they want to know more about designing for the user experience and for accessibility and performance and the three tenets that you mentioned?
The best resource comes to my mind right away is digitalservices.georgia.gov. we truly have a lot of content out there, and I don't know if everyone knows here that site exists. It's essentially started out as our team site, but everyone on this team is working on such amazing things. At one point we realized if we are not able to write something about what we're working on, what are we working on? And then we started contributing towards like a blog, and that truly has gained good traction. So keep kind of that in your bookmarks. But they're like, a wealth of resources. We do have some resources on that site as well. But especially for usability, when it comes to like government usability, I would point you to usability.gov. That's a really good site. I like it. Also, get yourself acquainted with like the 18Fs, GDS, USDS, all the digital services teams for our federal government, for gov.uk. They all are very content-minded, very digital services-minded, agile approach towards project delivery. I mean, it's amazing wealth out there, and you'll be surprised how friendly people are most times and willing to help you out if you have a question. But these would be like a really good starting point.
Yeah, I just say all those, and UX Magazine here in town does a fabulous job. They write for folks like you, and they have people like you writing for folks like you, which is kind of cool. And I think they've got great editorial staff, so I'd check them out.
Okay, well, thanks again to Kevin and User Insight for sponsoring today. It was amazing. And big round of applause for our speakers again.